Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about interstellar travel that nobody mentions in the recruitment brochures is how mind-numbingly boring it can be. Oh, sure, you get the glossy promises of adventure among the stars, diplomatic missions to exotic worlds, the chance to be humanity's ambassador to species that could bite your head off without breaking a sweat. What they don't tell you is that most of your time gets spent in a glorified tin can, hurtling through the void, surrounded by aliens who think your coffee smells like rotting vegetation, and your music sounds like mating calls gone horribly wrong. The Wandering Star was one of those tin cans, though admittedly a rather nice one. 300 meters of recycled alloys, quantum drives, and what the captain optimistically called cultural exchange facilities, which was really just a fancy way of saying places where different species can tolerate each other's existence without starting a war. It housed about 200 crew members from a dozen different planets, all crammed together in what galactic politicians like to call harmonious cooperation, and what everyone else called organized chaos, with occasional fistfights in the cafeteria. Cassidy had been aboard for 6 months now, long enough to know which bathrooms to avoid during Raptic's shedding season and which sections of the ship smelled perpetually like sulfur, because the Metherian engineers refused to shower by anyone's standards but their own. She was 32, human, and serving as what her official title called a cultural liaison, which was a polite way of saying she got paid to explain why humans did weird things, and to stop interspecies incidents before they became interstellar problems. Right now, she was doing one of those weird human things. The common lounge was relatively empty at this hour, just the ambient hum of the ship's systems and the distant chatter from the mess hall 3 sections over. Cassidy sat cross-legged on one of the low benches designed to accommodate species with tails. Her worn leather satchel open beside her, its contents spread across the smooth metal surface, like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Photographs. Actual, physical, printed-on-paper photographs. She was organizing them, sorting through memories made tangible when she heard the approach. Not footsteps, exactly. More like the scrape of claws on metal, the chittering rustle of exoskeletal joints, and the soft padding of oversized paws. Cassidy didn't look up. She'd learned early on that making direct eye contact with predator species could be interpreted as either a challenge or an invitation to play. And with juveniles, you really couldn't predict which. "What are those?" The voice was high-pitched, curious, and belonged to Fwip, a Chirrut kit who moved like caffeinated lightning and asked approximately 600 questions per hour. Her compound eyes, each the size of a human thumb, reflected the lounge's overhead lights in a kaleidoscope of colors. She was standing, if you could call it that, on 4 of her 6 limbs, the other 2 reaching forward with an interest that Cassidy recognized as the universal precursor to "I'm about to touch your stuff without permission." "Pictures," Cassidy said mildly, still organizing. "Photographs, visual representations of moments captured in time and printed on cellulose-based material." "I know what pictures are," came a deeper, slightly offended voice. Growler, the panther's cub, padded into view. He was about the size of a full-grown mountain lion from Earth, all sleek midnight fur and eyes that glowed faintly amber in low light. His species were apex predators on their homeworld, proud as lions and twice as touchy about their reputations. "We have holograms, 3-dimensional, perfect resolution, stored in quantum matrices that last forever. Those," he nodded at the photographs with obvious disdain, "look old, primitive." "That's because they are," Cassidy agreed cheerfully. She'd learned that the best way to deal with Growler's pride was to simply not engage with it. Roughly 180 years old, this technology, give or take. Then why? This from Snarl, the Raptix juvenile who completed the trio. He was smaller than Growler, but no less dangerous looking, all scales and angular features, with eyes that tracked movement with unsettling precision. Of the three, he was the quietest, which made him the most observant. Why use old technology when you have better options? Cassidy finally looked up, meeting three pairs of very different eyes. Three apex predators in juvenile form. Three species that could probably tear apart most of the galaxy's fauna without breaking a sweat. And all of them staring at her collection of paper photographs like she'd laid out ancient mystical runes. It was, she had to admit, pretty funny. Because, she said, picking up one of the photos, a faded image of a beach at sunset, some things are worth keeping in a form you can hold. Fwip's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of confusion. But holding is inefficient. Data can be corrupted. Physical objects degrade. Why not store memories in perfect digital clarity? Where's the fun in that? Cassidy shot back, but her smile was soft. She could see the genuine confusion in their alien features, the same bafflement she'd encountered 100 times since leaving Earth. Humans were weird. Humans were sentimental. Humans did things that made absolutely no logical sense to species that had evolved past such inefficiencies millennia ago. Growler sat down, his tail curling around his haunches in a way that suggested he was settling in for story time despite his apparent disinterest. "Humans confuse me," he declared, as if this were breaking news. "Your species makes no sense." "Tell me about it," Cassidy muttered. "We confuse ourselves most of the time." "But seriously," Snarl pressed, moving closer with that peculiar reptilian grace. "Why physical pictures? What purpose? Do they serve that digital storage doesn't?" Cassidy looked down at the photographs again, running her finger along the edge of one that showed a small house, half destroyed, with a little girl standing in front, clutching a stuffed animal. The colors had faded over the years, the edges were bent, and there was a coffee stain in one corner from a morning 5 years ago when she'd been reviewing them on a transport shuttle. "Why do humans keep pictures?" She repeated the question, more to herself than to them. Then she looked up, and something in her expression made all three cubs go very still in that way young predators do when they sense something important is about to happen. "So we remember the things we survived," Cassidy said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's engines thrummed their constant song. The ventilation system whispered recycled air through the ducts. And three juvenile apex predators stared at a human woman holding pieces of paper, trying to understand what she meant. Fwip broke first, as always. "Survived what?" Cassidy's smile was small, sad, and somehow fierce all at once. She set down the photograph of the destroyed house and looked at each of them in turn. "Everything," she said. "Want to hear some stories?" Growler and Snarl exchanged glances. Fwip's antennae shot straight up, and without a word, all three settled into more comfortable positions, their body language shifting from casual curiosity to rapt attention. They had no idea what they were asking for. How could they? Their species had evolved as hunters, as predators, as beings who faced their challenges with fang and claw, and moved on when the battle was done. They didn't understand yet that humans were different, that humans carried their battles with them, printed on paper and locked in hearts, that every scar was a story, and every story was a victory over the alternative. But they were about to learn. Cassidy reached for the first photograph. the one with the destroyed house and the small girl, and began to speak. Outside the viewport behind her, stars streamed past in the familiar distortion of faster-than-light travel. Inside, in a quiet lounge on a ship full of aliens, a human started to teach 3 predator cubs what it really meant to survive. And somewhere in the back of her mind, where memories lived alongside hope, Cassidy wondered if they'd understand. If anyone who wasn't human could truly grasp the weight of remembering, the power of refusing to forget. She supposed they'd find out soon enough. The photograph showed devastation, not the clean, dramatic kind you see in action hollows where buildings explode in perfectly choreographed fireballs, but the messy, real kind. A house reduced to skeletal remains of timber and twisted metal. Debris scattered across what might have once been a lawn. Water damage staining everything in sight. And in the foreground, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing in rubber boots too big for her feet, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "That's you," Snarl said. It wasn't a question. His people were good at pattern recognition. "That's me," Cassidy confirmed. "Age 6, 26 years ago. That pile of expensive kindling behind me used to be my house." Growler leaned forward, his glowing eyes narrowing. "What destroyed it? Orbital bombardment? Seismic weapon? Rival clan attack?" "Hurricane," Cassidy said. "Category 5. That's our classification system for really, really angry weather." 3 sets of alien features registered varying degrees of confusion. "Weather?" Whip's antennae drooped. "Your dwelling was destroyed by meteorological phenomena?" "Yep." "Wind speeds around 300 kilometers per hour. Storm surge that put half the city underwater. Rain that fell so hard and so long that you couldn't tell where the ocean ended and the sky began." Cassidy's finger traced the edge of the photo, following the outline of the destroyed house. "It hit on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in school, learning about long division and how to diagram sentences. By Wednesday evening, I was hiding in a bathtub with my mom, my little brother, 3 blankets, and that rabbit you see there, listening to the world end outside." "But you survived," Growler pointed out, as if this were the end of the story. "We did," Cassidy agreed. "Spent 18 hours in that bathtub. No power, no water after the first few hours, nothing to eat except the granola bars my mom had shoved in her pockets when we ran from the car. My brother wouldn't stop crying. I wouldn't stop singing every single song I knew, over and over. Because if I stopped singing, I'd start crying too, and then we'd all be crying, and that felt like giving up." She paused, remembering. The sound of wind that screamed like something alive. The way the house shook with each gust. The moment when something huge, they never found out what, slammed into the roof with a crash that made her mother scream and her brother go silent with fear. "We sang 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star' probably 200 times that night," Cassidy continued. "When the storm finally passed and we crawled out, half the neighborhood was gone. Just gone. Houses reduced to foundations. Trees stripped bare. Cars flipped upside down 3 blocks from where they'd been parked." "So you fought the storm," Growler said, and there was respect in his voice now. "You battled the elements and won." Cassidy laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. No, we didn't fight anything. We hid. We survived by being small and scared and lucky. That's not a battle. That's just endurance. Outlasting the thing that's trying to kill you." Snarl cocked his head, confused. "Then why keep the picture? Where's the honor in hiding?" "Because," Cassidy said softly, "we survived. And 3 families on our street didn't. And I keep this picture not because I'm proud, but because forgetting what that storm taught me would be stupid. What did it teach you? Fwip asked. That nature doesn't care about you, that safety is temporary, that sometimes survival isn't about being strong or brave, it's just about holding on when everything in you wants to let go. Cassidy set the photo down gently. And that granola bars taste like cardboard, but when you're 6 and scared and hungry, they're the best thing you've ever eaten. The cubs sat in silence, processing. Cassidy could practically see their brains trying to reconcile this with their understanding of survival. Predators fought. Predators conquered. They didn't hide in bathtubs singing children's songs. Before they could formulate their next question, Cassidy picked up another photo. This one showed a teenage girl, older, wearing strange ceremonial robes and a flat hat with a tassel, holding a rolled piece of paper. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her smile slightly crooked, but there was something fierce in her expression. Graduation, Cassidy announced. Age 18. First person in my family to finish what we call university. Advanced education. Education is universal, Growler said dismissively. All civilized species educate their young. Sure, Cassidy agreed, but not all of them make you pay for it. Not all of them make it so expensive that you have to work 3 jobs while studying just to afford the privilege of learning. That got their attention. 3 jobs? Snarl's tail twitched. While also studying. Breakfast shift at a diner, 4 in the morning to 8. Classes from 9 to 4. Library assistant from 5 to 9. Weekends I worked at a warehouse loading boxes. Cassidy's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was an edge to it. Slept maybe 4 hours a night. Lived on instant noodles and whatever food people left behind in the diner. Missed parties, dates, sleep, sanity. But why? Fwip's confusion was almost comical. If education is necessary, why make it a trial of endurance? Because humans are really good at making things harder than they need to be, Cassidy said dryly. Because I was born poor, and being poor is expensive. Because the system was designed by people who never had to choose between buying textbooks and eating for a week. That's insane, Growler said flatly. What kind of civilization doesn't provide for its young? The kind that likes to pretend everything is fine while half its population struggles to survive, Cassidy replied. Welcome to humanity, where we've figured out faster-than-light travel, but not how to feed everyone. Snarl was staring at the photo with new intensity. No one attacked you. There was no natural disaster. No predator. No enemy. You were fighting, what? Poverty? Circumstance? Bingo, Cassidy said, pointing at him. Gold star for the Raptics. Sometimes the thing trying to kill you isn't a monster or a storm. Sometimes it's just life, grinding you down day after day, daring you to quit. And you didn't, Fwippy said quietly. Quit. Nope. Walked across that stage, got my degree, and cried for about 6 hours straight afterward, because I was so tired I couldn't remember what rest felt like. Cassidy smiled at the memory, bittersweet. Mom was in the audience. She'd worked double shifts for a month to afford the trip to come watch. When I saw her face, that's when I knew it was worth it. Your species fights ghosts, Snarl observed, and it didn't sound like an insult. Yeah, Cassidy agreed, and we win more often than you'd think. The third photograph made Fwip recoil slightly. It showed Cassidy, clearly an adult now, lying in what was obviously a medical bed. She was thinner, paler, with tubes and wires connected to her arm. But she was giving the camera a weak thumbs up, and someone had drawn a smiley face on her hospital gown in what looked like permanent marker. Medical facility, Growler identified immediately. You were injured. Sick, Cassidy corrected. Picked up something nasty during one of the first contact missions to the Outer Rim. Alien pathogen. My immune system had no idea what to do with it. Spent 3 weeks in isolation while the doctors tried to figure out if I was going to die, or just wish I was dying. Disease is a predator we understand, Snarl said. The invisible enemy. All species face it. This one nearly won, Cassidy admitted. There were 2 days where my fever got so high I started hallucinating. Thought I was back home, thought I was 6 again, hiding from the hurricane, kept asking for my stuffed rabbit. She laughed softly. The nurse was very patient about explaining that I was 30 years old and rabbitless. But they cured you, Whip said, relief evident in her voice. They did. Synthesized an antiviral that worked just well enough to let my body finish the fight. Dr. Milson. That was her name. She spent something like 60 hours straight in the lab, running simulations, testing compounds. And the nurses, they kept me alive, kept me comfortable, talked to me when I was scared. Cassidy's voice went soft. That smiley face on my gown? Nurse Addison drew it. Said I needed something cheerful to look at. So you didn't survive alone, Growler observed. Humans rarely do, Cassidy said. That's kind of our secret weapon. We're pack hunters, just not in the way you think. We don't hunt prey together. We hunt problems. We hunt death. We hunt despair. And we're really, really good at it because we refuse to let each other fail. She set that photo down and picked up the 4th one, and her expression changed. Went quieter. More somber. This photograph showed her, older still, standing in a cemetery. Black clothes. Other people around her, also in black. In the foreground, a grave marker, fresh dirt still visible around its base. The cubs went very still. This one, Cassidy said quietly, is my dad. This is the day we buried him. The silence was absolute. Death was universal. Death, they understood. He was 58, Cassidy continued. Heart attack. Quick, at least. One moment he was laughing at something stupid on television, the next he was gone. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, just gone. This is a mourning image, Snarl said softly. You keep a picture of grief? I keep a picture of love, Cassidy corrected, because he was the one who sang with me in the bathtub during the hurricane. He was the one who taught me that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest, it was about being the most stubborn. That if life knocked you down, you got back up. And if you couldn't get up, you crawled. And if you couldn't crawl, you found someone to carry you until you could try again. Growler's ears had flattened against his skull, a panthist gesture of respect for the dead. Your species memorializes loss? We do, Cassidy said, because forgetting the people who shaped us means they die twice. Once when their body fails, and again when we let their memory fade. Predators move on, Snarl said, but there was something uncertain in his voice now. Grief it's a luxury. It slows the pack. Better to remember the lesson and release the pain. Maybe that works for you, Cassidy said gently. But humans, we're weird. We carry our dead with us. Not literally, obviously. That would be unsanitary and probably illegal. But here, she tapped her chest over her heart. And here, she tapped her temple. They live on in the choices we make, the things we do, the way we love the people who are still here. That sounds exhausting, Whip said. It is, Cassidy agreed. It's also beautiful. Painful, yes. Heavy, absolutely. But beautiful. She laid out all the photographs now, a timeline of survival in paper and ink. Hurricane, graduation, hospital, funeral, 4 moments, 4 kinds of pain, 4 different ways of enduring. So that's why humans keep pictures, she said. Not to celebrate, not to boast, but to remember. To prove to ourselves that we've hurt before and healed, that we've fallen and gotten back up, that we've lost and continued anyway. You memorialize pain, Growler said slowly, working through it, to remind yourselves that pain is survivable. Now you're getting it, Cassidy said with a tired smile. We keep pictures of the things that tried to break us as proof that we're stronger than we think. When things get hard, when we're scared or hurting or ready to give up, we can look at these and remember. We've done hard things before. We can do them again. The 3 cubs stared at the photographs with new understanding. Humans weren't the physically strongest species, weren't the fastest or the most naturally armed, but they had this, the stubborn refusal to forget, to let go, to move on without carrying the weight of everything they'd endured. It was, Snarl thought, possibly the most terrifying thing he'd learned about humans yet. And then the alarms started blaring, and terrifying took on a whole new meaning. The sound was unmistakable, even if you'd never heard it before. Shrill, pulsating, designed by some sadistic engineer to trigger every primal fear response in every species aboard. Red lights began strobing in the corridors outside the lounge, casting everything in a bloody, flickering glow that made the peaceful moment shatter like glass. Warning! Hull breach detected. Unauthorized vessels approaching. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The ship's automated voice was calm, which somehow made it worse, like being told politely that you were probably about to die. Cassidy was on her feet before the announcement finished, muscle memory from a life she'd supposedly left behind kicking in with the subtlety of a plasma grenade. Her hands moved automatically, scooping the photographs back into her satchel with practiced speed, slinging the bag across her shoulder as her eyes scanned the lounge for threats, exits, options. The 3 cubs, meanwhile, had frozen. It would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. 3 apex predators, species that had climbed to the top of their respective food chains through cunning and violence, sitting like statues because their juvenile brains couldn't process the sudden shift from story time to mortal peril. Growler's fur had puffed up, making him look twice his size, but no more mobile. Fwip's antennae were flat against her head, her compound eyes wide. Snarl's scales had shifted to a mottled camouflage pattern, an automatic response, but he wasn't moving. Up! Cassidy snapped, her voice cutting through their shock like a blade. Now! Move! The ship shuddered. A deep, groaning vibration that said something very large had just hit something very important. The lights flickered. Somewhere distant, alarms of a different pitch joined the chorus, and Cassidy's trained ear identified them. Fire suppression systems, atmospheric breach warnings, weapons discharge. They were under attack. Actually, genuinely, lethally under attack. Where? Growler managed, finding his voice even as his body stayed locked in fear. Emergency shelter, Section C, 20 meters that way, Cassidy pointed, already moving toward them, her hands grabbing Fwip first because the Chirrut was smallest and closest to panic. We move fast, we move quiet, and we move now. But shouldn't we? Snarl started. No, Cassidy cut him off. Whatever you're about to suggest, no. You're children. Trained children, maybe, but children. My job is to keep you alive, and I'm very good at my job. Another shudder, closer this time. The sound of tearing metal screeched through the walls, and that was bad. That was very bad, because the wandering star was built to withstand a lot of punishment. Whatever was hitting them wasn't playing around. Cassidy hauled Whip up, the Chiric's legs scrambling for purchase against her arm, and started moving toward the corridor. "Follow me. Stay close. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. If I say jump out an airlock, well, maybe question that one, but otherwise, you do what I say. Clear?" "Clear," three voices said in ragged unison. The corridor was chaos, crew members running in every direction. Species Cassidy had barely learned the names of scrambling toward their assigned stations. The overhead lights were fully red now, emergency lighting that made everything look like a nightmare. Smoke was starting to drift through the ventilation system, acrid and wrong-smelling. Cassidy moved like she was still in uniform, cutting through the panic with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, who'd trained for this exact scenario in a dozen different variations. The cubs followed, their natural agility overcoming their fear, predator instincts kicking in even if they'd never actually had to use them in a real crisis before. The emergency shelter was a reinforced section of the ship designed to protect non-combatants during attacks. Thick walls, independent life support, emergency supplies, and, most importantly, doors that could withstand pretty much anything short of a direct hit from a capital ship's main gun. Cassidy had memorized its location on her second day aboard, because that's what you did when you'd seen enough bad situations to know they could happen anywhere, any time. They were 15 meters away when the ceiling exploded. Not the actual ceiling, but close enough. A section of wall about 6 meters ahead simply ceased to exist, replaced by a gaping hole and the hissing rush of atmosphere trying to escape into space. Emergency bulkheads started slamming down, compartmentalizing the breach, and Cassidy's brain ran the calculations in the split second before her body reacted. Can't go forward. Bulkheads closing. Need alternate route. Left, she barked, pivoting hard, yanking Whip with her. Service corridor now. They ran. The ship kept shaking, kept screaming its mechanical agony through every rivet and weld. Behind them, Cassidy could hear voices, shouts, the distinctive sound of plasma weapons discharging. The attackers had breached. They were inside. The service corridor was narrower, dimmer, lined with pipes and conduits that hummed with barely contained power. Cassidy's boots pounded against the deck plating, her breath coming hard but controlled, her mind racing through options and contingencies and the rapidly dwindling list of things that could go right. The shelter entrance was ahead, 10 meters, the door still open and beckoning like salvation. 5 meters. 3. Cassidy shoved the cubs through first, Whip practically thrown into the safe room, Growler and Snarl scrambling after. She was half a step behind, ready to slam her hand on the door controls and seal them all inside where armor and luck might keep them alive. And that's when she saw them. 5 figures, moving down the corridor they'd just left. Not crew. Wrong profiles. Wrong gear. Moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of military training and bad intentions. Pirates. Had to be. The Silithian Reavers, probably, given the distinctive armor and the reputation for hitting civilian vessels in this sector. They hadn't seen the shelter yet. Hadn't seen Cassidy. But they would, in about 3 seconds, and then they'd know exactly where the non-combatants were hiding. Time slowed in the way it does when adrenaline dumps into your system and your brain shifts into that crystal-clear state where everything becomes a series of choices and consequences. Cassidy could go inside, seal the door, hope the pirates moved past. But if they'd bothered to board rather than just destroy the ship, they were looking for something. Hostages, maybe. Valuables. and a shelter full of trapped civilians would be exactly what they wanted. Or, "Stay inside," Cassidy said quietly, not looking at the cubs. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except the captain or someone you absolutely know and trust." "What are you?" Growler started, but Cassidy was already moving. There was an emergency weapons locker 3 meters down the corridor, marked with the universal symbol for break glass in case of everything going horribly wrong. Cassidy's elbow went through the transparent panel without hesitation, her hand closing around the grip of a plasma rifle that was standard issue on every diplomatic vessel. Not military grade, but it would do. She checked the charge, flicked off the safety, and turned to face the corridor where 5 armed pirates were about to round the corner and find a very inconvenient human standing between them and their objectives. Behind her, she heard the shelter door hiss shut, the locks engaging. Good. The cubs were safe. Now she just had to make sure they stayed that way. The first pirate came around the corner and stopped dead, his weapon coming up as his brain processed the unexpected obstacle. He was Silithian, all right. Scales like tarnished copper and eyes like chips of black ice. His armor was scarred, his rifle was pointed at her center mass, and his voice, when he spoke, was full of the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight. "Well," he said, and even through the translator's monotone, Cassidy could hear the amusement. "A human with a gun. This is almost sad." Cassidy didn't smile, didn't snarl, didn't do anything except keep her rifle pointed at his chest, and her voice dead level. "Yeah," she said, "we're full of disappointing surprises." His name was Grizz, she'd learn later. He was wanted on 6 worlds for murder, piracy, and what the polite reports called extreme violence. He'd killed more people than Cassidy had met. His crew was legendary for leaving no survivors. None of that mattered right now. What mattered was that he was between Cassidy and a bunch of terrified children, and she'd already survived a hurricane, poverty, disease, and loss. She'd crawled through every kind of hell her species could. Devise and a few the universe had thrown in for flavor. She'd be damned if some second-rate pirate with delusions of adequacy was going to be the thing that finally broke her. "Last chance," Grizz said, his rifle still aimed at her. "Move or die." Inside the shelter, pressed against the door's viewport, 3 juvenile predators watched as a human, that supposedly weak species without claws or fangs or armor plating, looked at 5 armed raiders and didn't move. "No," Cassidy said simply. And then she pulled the trigger. What happened next wasn't graceful. It wasn't heroic in the way stories made it sound. It was brutal, messy, and desperate. Cassidy's first shot took Grizz in the shoulder because she wasn't military anymore, and her aim was rusty, and adrenaline makes everything harder. He went down anyway, screaming, his rifle clattering away. The corridor erupted in plasma fire. Cassidy dove behind a support beam, her shoulder slamming into metal hard enough to bruise, returning fire with the kind of spray-and-pray tactics that every instructor had told her were inefficient, but which right now were keeping her alive. She hit one pirate in the leg, another in the chest plate. Not kill shots, but enough to make them rethink their life choices. The fourth one, smarter than his companions, was flanking, using the pipes and conduits for cover, and Cassidy's brain was screaming calculations. Ammunition, angles, time until reinforcements arrived for one side or the other. Her rifle's charge indicator was dropping fast. Her shoulder was definitely bruised, possibly cracked. Her ears were ringing from the weapon's discharge in an enclosed space, and she was grinning, a wild, fierce expression that would have terrified anyone who saw it. Because this She understood. This was simple. This was survival stripped to its most basic form. Stay alive, keep them away from the cubs, hold the line. The flanking pirate got around her cover, and Cassidy didn't have time to aim, just thrust the rifle out like a club and caught him across the faceplate. He staggered, she kicked him in the knee joint, and when he fell, she grabbed his weapon. And now she had 2 rifles, and things were looking marginally less suicidal. Grizz was back up somehow, his good arm swinging his rifle around despite the blood streaming down his armor. Cassidy shot him again, this time in the leg, and he went down harder. "Stay down," she panted, her voice raw. He didn't. They never did. He was reaching for a sidearm when the cavalry arrived in the form of 6 security officers in full combat gear who came around the opposite corner with weapons hot and intent clear. The remaining pirates, suddenly outnumbered and outgunned, made the wise choice of surrendering. Grizz, less wisely, tried to take a shot at the nearest officer and got stunned for his trouble, his body convulsing once before going limp. Cassidy stood there, breathing hard, 2 rifles in her hands, blood on her uniform from someone else's wounds, her satchel miraculously still hanging from her shoulder with all her precious photographs inside. "Ma'am," one of the security officers said, lowering his weapon. "Are you injured?" Cassidy did a quick mental inventory. Bruises? Yes. Scrapes? Probably. Cracked rib? Maybe. Dead? No. "I'm fine," she said, which was a lie, but a functional one. Then she turned to the shelter door and knocked, 3 times slow, 2 times fast. The code they'd established in those frantic seconds before she'd locked them in. The door opened. 3 pairs of eyes stared out at her. At the unconscious pirates. At the security team. At Cassidy, standing there with weapons in her hands and that wild grin still on her face. "Told you," Cassidy said, her voice shaking just slightly now that the adrenaline was starting to ebb. "I'm very good at my job." And then her legs decided they were done holding her up, and she sat down hard on the deck plating, the rifles clattering beside her, her hands starting to shake with the aftershocks of violence and terror, and the sheer, overwhelming relief of still being alive. The cubs crept out of the shelter slowly, uncertainly, staring at her like they'd never seen a human before. And maybe, Cassidy thought distantly, they hadn't. Not really. Not the part of humanity that survived not through strength, but through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to quit. "You fought them," Whip whispered, awe in her voice. "You fought 5 raiders and held them until help came." "I survived them," Cassidy corrected weakly. "There's a difference." But as she said it, as the security team helped her to her feet, and the medics came running, and the ship's all-clear signal finally sounded, she caught Snarl's eye, and the young Raptix nodded slowly, understanding blooming in his alien features. Humans kept pictures, so they could remember the things they survived. And survival, he was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous thing humans knew how to do. Medical bays smelled the same on every ship Cassidy had ever served on. Antiseptic, recycled air, and the faint metallic tang of equipment that had seen too much use. She woke up there 6 hours after the attack, bandaged and bruised but alive, which was more than she'd expected when she'd pulled that trigger. The cubs were there, all 3 of them sitting in chairs that weren't designed for their anatomies, looking simultaneously relieved and exhausted in ways that transcended species. "You're awake," Whip said, her antennae perking up immediately. "The medical staff said you'd be fine, but we wanted to make sure." "Takes more than a pirate raid to keep me down," Cassidy said, her voice rough. She tried to sit up, winced, and decided horizontal was fine for now. You three okay? We're unharmed, Growler said, and there was something different in his tone. Quieter, less prideful. Thanks to you. Just doing my job, Cassidy started, but Snarl cut her off. No, the young Raptix said, firmly. It was more than that. We saw you. You were terrified. Cassidy blinked. Okay, rude, but accurate. But you fought anyway, Snarl continued. You were scared. You were outgunned. You had every reason to run or hide with us. But you stood between us and them, and you fought. Someone had to, Cassidy said simply. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. The cubs exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them, and then Growler stood, moving closer to the medical bed. Before the attack, he said carefully, you mentioned there was one more picture. One you hadn't shown us yet. Cassidy's hand moved automatically to her satchel, which someone had thoughtfully placed on the side table. Her fingers found the leather worn smooth by years of handling, and she pulled it into her lap, wincing at the movement. Yeah, she said quietly. There is. She pulled out a photograph that was more worn than all the others, edges frayed, colors faded almost to nothing. It showed a group of people in military gear, dust-covered and exhausted, standing in front of what looked like a bunker. They were smiling, mostly, but their eyes told different stories. And across the faces of more than half of them, someone had drawn small marks, neat little symbols in fading ink. My unit, Cassidy said. Colonial Defense Force, 2nd Battalion. This was taken after we held a civilian evacuation point for 3 days against raiders who really wanted to stop us. Her finger traced the marks on the faces. These symbols, they mean fallen. These people didn't make it home. The cubs stared at the photograph with new eyes, understanding now what they were looking at. Not a victory. Not a celebration. A memorial. I carry them, Cassidy continued, her voice thick, because they stood when they could have run. Because they gave everything so others could survive. Because forgetting them would be wrong. Would be like saying their sacrifice meant nothing. That's what you meant, Fwip whispered, about remembering the things you survived. You survived because they didn't. That's survivor's guilt talking, Cassidy said with a weak smile. But yeah, basically. Growler was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He pulled out a small device, standard-issue holographic recorder that every galactic citizen carried, and held it up. May we? He paused, finding the words. May we take a picture? With you? Cassidy felt something catch in her throat. You want to remember this? We want to remember what we survived today, Snarl said softly. And who helped us survive it? So they did. It was awkward, getting 3 alien juveniles and 1 bandaged human arranged in a way the camera could capture. Fwip kept fidgeting, her antennae twitching nervously. Growler tried to look dignified despite the ridiculousness of the situation. Snarl held very still, his expression solemn. And Cassidy, in the middle of them all, smiled. Tired, hurt, but genuinely happy. The holographic image captured that moment, froze it in digital perfection. But when Growler asked if she wanted a copy, Cassidy shook her head. Print it, she said, on actual paper. I'll add it to my collection. 2 days later, when the wandering star limped into the nearest station for repairs, Cassidy sat in the repaired lounge with her satchel open. The new photograph was there now, physical and real, showing a human and 3 predator cubs trying very hard to smile like humans smiled. It wasn't perfect. Fwip's antennae were blurry from movement. Growler's eyes reflected the flash weirdly. Snarl looked vaguely constipated from the effort of holding the expression. It was beautiful. Cassidy tucked it carefully into her collection, right after the photo of her old unit. Another moment survived. Another memory worth keeping. Another piece of proof that pain was temporary, that fear could be overcome, that survival was possible even when it seemed impossible. She heard voices approaching and looked up to see the cubs returning, this time with their parents in tow. The adult predators looked at her with expressions that might have been respect, or might have been unease, or might have been both. Fwip's mother spoke first, her translator rendering her clicks into words. "You protected our children." "I did," Cassidy confirmed. "Why?" Growler's father asked bluntly. "You could have sealed yourself inside with them. Let security handle the threat." Cassidy thought about hurricanes and hospitals, about graduation and graves, about all the moments that had taught her what survival really meant, about the people who'd stood for her when she couldn't stand for herself. "Because," she said simply, touching the new photograph, "someone has to. And I've survived enough to know that's what we do. We stand. We protect. We remember. And then we survive, so we can do it all again tomorrow." The predator parents nodded slowly, their powerful forms somehow diminished by the simple truth of it. And in the viewport behind Cassidy, stars streamed past in the familiar distortion of faster-than-light travel. The universe kept spinning. The ship kept flying. Life kept happening. And one human woman kept her pictures close, proof that she'd survived everything the universe had thrown at her so far. With one more photograph added to the collection, and room in her satchel for whatever came next.